Thank you so much for this occasion. My name is Michel Scholte. I'm an entrepreneur from Amsterdam, and I'm the founder of True Price and Impact Institute. We employ 85 people now, calculating what is behind products that we see in the store. I would like to share with you what a true price is, and also how true prices can actually lead to a movement for more sustainable products. And if you ask me, I would say there is no sustainable economy without true prices. And I know it's a bold statement, but let me illustrate this for you. My mother didn't have a nail to scratch her butt. And sorry for being so explicit, but I was frustrated as a kid. And I asked her, why don't we have money? And she said, you think we are poor? Go travel the world and see where's poverty. And I did so. And I saw that there is around the world a lot of relative and absolute deprivation. And I saw that in West African countries, there's smallholder farmers working in cocoa plants, supplying cocoa to the harbors in Amsterdam, the largest harbors in the world, where there's billions of profits being made. And at the same time, these farmers are kept poor for generations. And this was for me something I couldn't comprehend. I was a teenager and I was convinced that I could change the world and, do all sorts of philanthropic projects. And at the same time, I felt used by a system that is inherently exploitative. And in a context of colonialism, I thought we haven't really let go of these exploitative structures. If you export as a cocoa entrepreneur in Ghana a chocolate bar to the Netherlands, you pay a high tariff. And at the same time, if you export commodities, raw beans, then you don't have to pay for these tariffs. This is an exploitative structure, and it's exemplary for the system that we currently have. It's very exploitative, the food systems around the world. And we have to go into the core of the matter, and that is how we actually price stuff. And I quickly discovered that the prices that we pay for these chocolate bars do not reflect the living wages and living income of the workers that work their butt off to get these products in the store. And what even more so, there's no account for the environmental pollution, the exploitation of nature, the pollution of water, air, and soil. And if we make a calculation that includes those costs, we get to a true price. True prices are market prices plus the social and environmental cost in the whole value chain of a product. And now you may ask the question, how do we make these calculations? Well, we do not have to invent the wheel. There's decades of thinking around what are actually norms for dignity. What are the principles that we need to stick to? What is unalienable to people if you want to consider a value chain in dignity? And these are called human rights. In the late 1940s, Eleanor Roosevelt stipulated in a convention with countries the premises, the preconditions for dignity. The Universal Declaration for Human Rights as a response to the evil that was part of the world in the Second World War. And decades later, there was this kind of proliferation of these norms into the ILO standards, the worker rights standards, the Convention of Parties on Biodiversity, on climate. And basically the world has done a courageous job in the context of the United Nations to set out what we consider, preconditions for dignity and things that you need to respect and protect at all times. However, tragically, with the dissemination of the global trade, there was no real feedback. There was no real check between how we design products and services and whether or not these kind of principles are respected and protected. And that actually allows us to have this stark contrast that was the thing that triggered me when I was a teenager. I was part of a think tank. We were used to giving advice to ministers in the Netherlands, but there was a right-wing movement in parliament, and this concept of sustainability lost its political momentum. And we decided to build this movement of consumers, of producers, and to bring this into practice. And we were like, well, this must be the most popular thing to do. And we pitched this. We pitched this to professors, to high-ranking CEOs of companies, to entrepreneurs. And the professor said, this is not possible. We tried this 20 years ago, and technically it's not possible. The entrepreneur, and this is the biggest, I would say, disqualification you can get from an American entrepreneur, said, this is communism, dictating prices. And another big disqualification came from the CEO of a large supermarket firm who said, this is against competition. Price agreements are against the competition law and you will be jailed for cartels. It was a hard start, a rough start. We tried to get a momentum for this methodology. We gathered, bright minds to write it out. And basically what we did was we said, if you look at human rights and you calculate not necessarily the inherent kind of the, what is a tree? What's the price tag for a tree? Because, that's kind of the tragic commodification of nature. If you would price nature, you open the risk, and that is what Popper would call the good intentions that pave the way to hell. You open the risk that we kind of commodify everything and, it will always be cheaper to remove all the nature than to reduce the profits, right? Just put a price tag on coral reef. You kind of look at the profits you can gain from oil and you can just sell out nature. That's the tragedy that we've seen in decennia of environmental economics. We took a different approach. We took a rights-based approach and we basically said you have to respect and protect nature. You have to respect and protect human rights. What would it cost to restore, compensate and prevent the infringement of those rights? So it's not an intrinsic valuation, it's kind of the valuation of respecting and protecting human rights, which obviously is also not kind of free from trade-offs, but there's many border cases. 80% of this is actually quite straightforward. What's the cost to absorb carbon if you have emitted it? And what does it cost to prevent the emissions in the future? And the same goes for example, child labor. What is the cost to get a child labor out of the exploitative structures, to compensate for the income that then is lost for the family, to compensate for the education loss, to compensate for the healthcare, mental and physical healthcare costs. So it's kind of a pragmatic approach. We made it open source. And the first client that was believing in this after we failed setting up a foundation because no one really thought this was something that you could achieve, we got an email from a chocolate brand, a relatively small bar in the supermarket called Tony Chocolonely. And Tony Chocolonely wasn't the biggest category leader that they are today, in at least the Netherlands and many countries across the EU. But they were still a small bar and they said, well, you are kind of bright guys, you know how to make these calculations. We have claims and ambitions about sustainability. Can you help us with these calculations? And we did so. And they were kind of aspiring to go towards slave-free. That was their mission. And we basically gave them a wave of additional problems. We said there's also insufficient payment for these farmers, under-earning. There's also natural capital damage, the damage to soil, to air, to water. You have to set up additional projects. And they made a choice in 20 minutes after our presentation to transfer it was like 1.5 million euros to their procurement department to assure that there's on average a living income amongst those smallholder farmers in Ivory Coast. Those farmers that inspired me in the first place. This was the start of a wider movement. We have done dozens of these projects and we now started 3 years ago the first supermarket in the world that has true prices. And I want to assure you that it's not just transactions, it's not just actual payments. You can also provide transparency. Just showing what a true price is already very valuable. I know we are in a cost of living crisis. What's new? We have seen poverty every second, every past year. It's nothing new, but we've seen, definitely inflation. Just showing transparency already something. 2 products, one with a lower true price, will give an incentive to go for the lower true price. We'll give a differentiation for those brands that do well, that do better, to actually get more demand. You can provide voluntary transparency. We see from research that there is a 20%, 15% or so consumer willingness to pay for voluntary true prices. You can go for default true prices, or you can let consumers choose, or you can start a purchase point with just true prices, whatever suits the situation. This will make choices so much better. We have done more than 100,000 transactions. We have been able to install remediation projects in all of those value chains, but this is just the start. I would really encourage you to join the True Price movement. Thank you so much for being here, for your undoubtedly leadership in this movement. And thank you for giving me the stage.